I didn't go out to the field because I believed in ghosts. I went because silence has a way of daring you to answer. And that evening, the quiet felt personal, like it had been waiting for me. The road was the same cracked strip I'd driven as a kid. Fence posts leaned. The ditch held stale water that caught my headlights in thin lines. Everything looked normal in the exact way that makes you uneasy, because normal is what people use to cover what they don't want to explain. I parked at the gate and killed the engine. The hush rang in my ears. No music, no barking dogs, not even insects. Just the wide field stretching into dusk, weeds bent low, soil dark and damp. This land had been left to me, an inheritance, the lawyer said, as if dirt could be a blessing. My family called it a lifeline. A developer had offered real money, the kind that fixes problems fast, bills, repairs, the slow embarrassment of needing help. Money meant safety. That was the story. But standing there, I felt the other one pressing against it. Safety that comes from silence, and silence that comes from fear. I stepped through the gate. Cold air slid under my collar. My boots sank into soft ground, and the field seemed to swallow the sound. I told myself I was only checking the boundaries before signing papers. Practical, responsible. Still, my heart beat like I was doing something wrong. Halfway in, the weeds shivered. I waited for a harmless explanation, an animal, a branch, anything ordinary. Instead, a voice said, clear as conversation, Eli. My name. I froze. The sound didn't travel. It was close, intimate, like someone standing beside me speaking into the same pocket of air. I spun, scanning the shadows, the fence line, the distant trees. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No silhouette. Just the last daylight slipping behind the hill. Hello. I tried to sound annoyed, like this was a prank I could scold away. My voice came out thin. Silence answered, and for a second I almost believed my own relief. Grief does weird things. Stress does worse. Maybe my mind was inventing noise. Then the wind stopped completely. The field became so still it felt staged. Eli, the voice said again, softer, closer. Fear hit me, but not the kind that makes you run. It was the kind that drags your memory open. Every time I'd let a rumor pass as fact because questioning it would cost me comfort. I swallowed. Who are you? A pause, like someone weighing me. Then, right behind my left ear, the voice whispered, don't sell it. My hands went numb. I turned slowly, expecting anything I could see and label. There was still no one. What do you want? I whispered. Follow the fence to the oak, she said, and don't tell anyone you heard me. A warning and a plea. A stranger asking for my loyalty before she even gave me her name. I stood there with the field stretching around me, quiet, ordinary, innocent, and felt my stomach drop. If my family's money story was true, this land was my escape. But if her story was true, this land was where the truth had been buried. Either way, I was already in too deep to walk away. Behind me, the gate creaked once, like it was closing on its own. In town, my family waited for my signature, and my silence tomorrow soon. So I turned toward the fence, toward the old oak, and took my first step into whatever my hometown had hidden. Before I followed the fence to the oak, before the field said my name like it had lips, I came back to Briar Hollow for a reason that sounded ordinary. Death, a will, and a family that needed money fast. Mom called on a Tuesday. I was rinsing a mug when her voice cracked through the speaker. Eli, she said, and the way she said it made my stomach tighten. It's your Uncle Ray. He passed in his sleep. Uncle Ray was the steady one. He fixed what broke, showed up when people didn't ask, and carried loyalty like a habit. When I was a kid, he told me, you can leave this town, but don't let it make you cruel. I left anyway, and I told myself distance was strength. By Friday, I was driving past the Briar Hollow city limit sign, paint chipped, slogan still there, welcome home. The place looked frozen in time, brick storefronts, flat fields, the same faces that brightened when they recognized you. The kindness hit first. Waves, hugs, look at you. You made it back. Then came the quieter part. The pause before questions, the way people watched as if counting what you'd become and what you owed. At Mom's house, she hugged me too tight, like letting go would prove I was leaving again. "You're tired," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was sympathy or blame. The funeral was Saturday. The church was full, the fellowship hall fuller. Food appeared, stories too. People told me over and over, "Ray talked about you," like that was proof I still belonged. On the drive back from the cemetery, Mom spoke like grief had turned into a checklist. "We'll need a roofer before winter. The furnace is making that sound again. And Caleb can't keep floating the shop," she said, staring through the windshield. She never said, "I miss you." She said, "We can't afford another mistake." And I knew she meant my leaving as much as the bills. I nodded at stop signs and watched the familiar roads slide past, feeling a tug-of-war inside me. One side wanting to help, the other hearing the unspoken price. Come back, stay, obey. Even mourning here came with conditions, like love was something you earned by doing exactly what you were told and never questioning why the rules existed. Caleb stood near the back, shoulders squared, jaw locked. My brother had stayed, become the kind of man Briar Hollow respected, rooted, useful, predictable. He saw me walk in and gave me a smile that didn't soften his eyes. "Thought you'd send flowers," he muttered. "I came," I said. "For Ray," he replied, and looked past me as if I was something sharp. After the burial, Mom insisted we meet Mr. Pritchard, the lawyer. "We need to settle things," she said, voice bright in that brittle way people get when they're scared. We sat at the kitchen table. Uncle Ray's hat still hung by the door like he might come back for it. Mr. Pritchard read the will quickly, small accounts, the old truck, tools, a little money for repairs. Mom exhaled at the repairs fund. Caleb nodded when he got the shop equipment. Then Mr. Pritchard looked at me. "And to Eli," he said, "the North Field, parcel off County Road 9. The room snapped silent. Caleb pushed his chair back hard enough to squeal. "That's not," he started. "That field should stay with us." "It is with you," Mr. Pritchard said, calm as stone. "Eli is family." Mom stared at the table, then at me, eyes filling with something she refused to name. "Why would Ray leave you that?" she whispered, like she was asking what punishment this was. I had no answer. I didn't even know what the North Field was in their minds, just land or something heavier. That night Caleb cornered me on the back porch. The porch light buzzed. Moths hit it, frantic and blind. "You're going to sell," he said. "I haven't decided," I replied. He scoffed. "Don't pretend this is about you. Mom's roof is leaking. Ray's bills are real. The shop's behind. You walk in, you sign, you walk out. That's what you do, leave." The insult landed because it had teeth. I'd built my life around being the one who didn't need anyone. Caleb built his around making sure everyone needed him. In the morning, the buyer arrived like she'd been scheduled before Uncle Ray's body cooled. Marla Hensley drove a spotless black SUV that looked wrong on our muddy road. Her sympathy was polished. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "My client is expanding operations. Your parcel completes the footprint. We're prepared to make a generous offer." The number on the page made Mom's breath hitch. Caleb's eyes brightened, fast, then he tried to hide it. "It's time-sensitive," Marla added. "We need signatures by the end of the week." Mom touched my wrist. "Eli, this could fix everything," she whispered, as if money could stitch us back together. Caleb didn't touch me. His stare said, "Don't be selfish. Don't punish us because you chose a different life." "I want to see the land first," I said. Marla's smile held. "Of course, due diligence." After she left, Mom's voice dropped. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. That afternoon, I drove through town toward County Road 9. People waved and called my name, warm on the surface, cautious underneath. Stay polite. Stay quiet. At the gas station, Mrs. Larkin, my old teacher, hugged me and said, "Uncle Ray was one of the good ones." "Why would he leave me the North Field?" I asked. Her smile faltered. "He had reasons," she said quickly. "What happened out there?" I pressed. Her eyes darted toward the road. "Don't go digging, Eli," she murmured and walked away. At dinner, I brought up the field again. Mom set her fork down with a clink that made Caleb flinch. "We don't talk about that place," she said. Caleb snorted. "It's just land." "It's not just land," Mom snapped, and then her anger thinned into fear. She stared at her hands. "Years ago," she said, almost whispering, "a young woman went missing near that field." I waited for a name. None came. Caleb spoke fast, rehearsed. "They searched. They didn't find anything. It was a long time ago. People moved on." Moved on. The phrase sounded like a rule. Mom didn't argue. She just looked tired. Tired in a way that said she'd carried that silence longer than she wanted. I pushed my chair back. "I'm going to walk the boundary," I said. Mom's eyes lifted, pleading. Caleb's gaze hardened, warning. Neither of them tried to stop me, because stopping me would mean admitting there was something worth stopping. I grabbed my keys and left with one detail burning in my head. A girl vanished near my field, and Briar Hollow moved on too fast. If Uncle Ray had left me land, he would have left it to Caleb. He left it to me because he knew I was the one most likely to ask the question everybody else was trained not to speak. I told myself I was only going to walk the boundary. That's the lie you tell when you want to do something reckless but still feel reasonable. A boundary walk sounded practical, something you do before selling land. Not something you do because a woman's voice in an empty field whispered your name like she owned it. I waited until Mom's TV went quiet and the house settled into that thin, restless sleep that follows a funeral. Caleb's truck was still outside, proof he'd stayed to guard the plan. Sign, sell, fix the bills, keep the peace. I took my flashlight, a pocket knife, and my phone tools for logic. Proof I told myself that I wasn't chasing a ghost. The air had a late fall bite. I drove with the radio off because music felt like cheating. Every mile argued with me, reason insisting this was grief and stress, instinct insisting I'd been called for a reason. County Road 9 narrowed until it was basically a suggestion. The old gate appeared in my headlights like a jaw. I parked, killed the engine, and let the quiet pour in. The field spread out, black and wet, and for a second I hated it for being so ordinary. "All right," I muttered. "Let's prove it." I stepped through the gate. Dew clung to everything. The flashlight beam cut a pale tunnel, and beyond it the dark swallowed detail. The fence line ran along my left, wire sagging between posts. I followed it the way you follow rules, one step at a time, pretending rules keep you safe. Halfway to the oak, my phone buzzed. "Please just come back. We need you." Mom's words should have anchored me. Instead, they felt like a rope pulling in two directions, family on one end, truth on the other. I didn't answer. The oak rose ahead, larger than I remembered. Its branches spread like a warning. That's when my flashlight caught something that hadn't been there in daylight. A strip of red ribbon was tied to the fence post closest to the oak. Not a shred snagged by wind, an actual knot, tight and clean, like someone had taken their time. The color was loud against the field's darkness, a small flare saying, "Here." My skin prickled. I touched it, dry, not slick with dew like the weeds, fresh or protected or new enough to still feel intentional. "Okay," I whispered. "That's real." Behind me, the weeds shifted. I spun, heart slamming, and swept the light across the ground. Nothing. "Rabbits," I said, as if numbing fear made it smaller. Then the voice came again, close enough to warm my ear, steady enough to make my throat tighten. "You came." My knees went weak. This wasn't wind. This wasn't my mind trying to entertain itself. It was a young woman's voice, tired, careful, real. "I'm not imagining you," I whispered, because saying it out loud felt like grabbing a railing in the dark. "No," she said, "you're finally listening." Logic tried to stand up inside me. I hadn't slept well since Ray's funeral. I'd been braced for a fight with my family, but my fingers were still on the ribbon. The knot was still there beneath my thumb. "Who are you?" A pause like she was deciding how much I'd earned. Then, "Under the oak, in the roots. Don't dig where it's soft, dig where it's stubborn." "Why me?" "Because you left," she said, "and leaving means you can come back different." It hit a tender place. Briar Hollow trained you to survive by blending in. I'd survived by getting out. Maybe that was the only reason I could hold two truths at once. The town could smile and still lie. I crouched at the oak's base. The ground there was packed tight, stitched with thick roots. Soft spots were obvious, muddy pockets where rain pooled. I avoided them and pressed my palm into the firmer earth, feeling for anything that didn't belong. My flashlight flickered, I smacked it. The light steadied. I scraped away leaves and bark with my knife, then used my hands. Dirt wedged under my nails. The roots formed a rough triangle, and inside it the soil felt slightly raised, like a scar. "Here?" I asked. The air felt suddenly close. "Yes." I dug slowly, breath loud, senses stretched thin. Every little sound felt too big. My fingers raking soil, my shoes shifting my swallow. Something hard clicked under my knuckle. I stopped. My heart stopped with it. I brushed dirt aside and found metal, rusty, flat, with a corner like an old lunchbox. It was wedged between roots as if the tree had been holding it. I tugged. It didn't move. "Stubborn," the voice murmured, and the hint of humor in it made my eyes sting. I wedged my knife under the edge and pried. The box groaned, then loosened with a wet sucking sound. When it came free, it was heavier than it looked, coated in mud, cold as a confession. I wiped the lid with my sleeve. A strip of brittle tape ran across the seam. Someone had sealed it. Someone had wanted it to stay shut. "Is this yours?" I asked. "It was supposed to be my way out," she said. "It became my way back." A chill slid through me. "Are you alive?" Silence held for a beat, long enough to feel like a warning. "Open it," she said softly. "Please." My hands shook as I peeled the tape. It tore in stubborn little pieces. The latch resisted, then snapped open. The lid creaked up. Inside was a cloudy plastic bag. In it sat a small cassette recorder, the kind people used to leave on kitchen counters for reminders. Next to it was a single cassette with masking tape on the spine, the ink faded but readable. "Mara." My stomach dropped. My breath caught. "Mara," I said, tasting the name. The voice didn't correct me, didn't deny it. Under the recorder was a charm, tiny, silver, shaped like a sunflower, dulled by time but still recognizable. The kind of thing you'd touch when you needed courage. I rubbed it between my fingers and felt a fierce tenderness rise in my chest, like I'd picked up someone's pulse. Far off, a car engine rolled along the road. My body locked up. No headlights appeared, but the sound was enough to remind me. This town noticed things. This town protected its own version of events. "You need to go," the voice said, urgency cutting through her calm. "Not to the house, somewhere they won't see you." "Who?" I whispered. But she only said, "You'll know, take me with you." I stood, clutching the box tight, and hurried back along the fence. The ribbon flashed once in my light, red as a warning, then disappeared behind me. The field didn't feel empty anymore. It felt awake. At my car, my hands shook so badly I dropped my keys. I got the door open, slid inside, and locked it fast, the click loud in the quiet. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the field through the windshield. Logic was still scrambling to catch up, still trying to shrink this into something harmless. But the weight of the metal box on my lap refused to become a story I could laugh off later. I flipped my phone to airplane mode and set it face down. Then I pulled the recorder from the bag. The plastic was scratched. The buttons were worn smooth. It smelled faintly of dirt and old smoke. My thumb hovered over play. "Do it," the voice whispered, so close it felt like my own thought. I pressed play. Static hissed for a breath, then a girl's voice, young, strained, unmistakably real, filled my car. "If you found this, it means they lied." I replayed the tape until the words stopped sounding like sound and started sounding like a verdict. "If you found this, it means they lied." Not "help me," not "I'm scared." Just that clean, final, dangerous. The kind of sentence a town spends years burying under casseroles and Sunday smiles. Morning light today should have made me feel foolish. Instead, it made me feel furious. In daylight, the field looked harmless, mud, weeds, and old oak. But the metal box in my hands was real weight. The sunflower charm was real cold. And the name on the cassette, Mara, was real ink. Logic tried to rescue me. Grief does tricks, stress invents voices, old recorders can be planted. But instinct kept tapping the same point in my chest. The ribbon on the fence post wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me to find it. Someone wanted me to listen. I went back to Mom's house and performed normal like it was a job. Coffee, small talk, a nod when she mentioned the roof again. Caleb barely looked at me, but I could feel his opinion like pressure. Don't make waves, don't make us pay for your curiosity. I didn't tell them about the tape. In Briar Hollow, secrets didn't stay secrets. They leaked, and leaks always reach the people with money fast enough to plug them. I made a list on the back of a receipt. Mara Wright, quote, S family. Someone who went to school with her. Someone in law enforcement who wasn't afraid anymore. The place she was last seen. The only full name I had was Delaney. I'd heard it once years ago and then never again, as if the town had wiped its mouth after saying it. The Delaney house sat near the railroad tracks, small and neat in a tired way. I knocked, and a woman answered with her chain still latched. Her hair was pulled back tight, like she didn't trust the world to be gentle. Yes. I'm Eli, I said, Ray's nephew. Recognition flickered, then hardened into suspicion. What do you want? I pulled out the sunflower charm. I didn't explain it. I just held it out and watched her face change. Her hand flew to her mouth. That was hers. Mara, I asked softly. The chain stayed latched, but her eyes filled anyway. People say her name when they want attention, she whispered, angry at herself for reacting. And people find things when they want money. I don't want anything, I said. I found a box under the oak on the north field. There's a recording. At the words north field, her gaze snapped past me to the street, to the invisible center of town where power sat like a judge. Don't say that out loud, she said. My throat tightened. Why is everyone afraid of saying it out loud? Because it's true, her face answered, even before her voice did. They told us she ran, she said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind her like the house itself might be listening. They told us she was dramatic. The sheriff looked me in the eye and said, "Girls do this," like my daughter was a phase. Did you believe them? I asked. Her mouth trembled. I tried, she admitted. Believing them was the only way to survive breakfast. She told me the last time she saw Mara, a Friday night, a slammed door, an argument that still lived in her bones. She said she was meeting someone, she whispered. Wouldn't say who. I thought if I pushed hard enough, I could keep her safe. Instead, I pushed her out. Did anyone help you? I asked. A bitter laugh. Help! 2 men came to my porch on Monday. One was a deputy. The other wasn't in uniform, but he spoke like he owned the air. He told me not to put up posters because it would cause panic. Who was he? I asked. Her eyes slid away like the name burned. A Hensley, she said, barely audible. One of the older ones. The same name on Marla's folder. The same polished confidence. A powerful buyer with long roots. I left her porch and drove to the diner, because if paper won't talk, sometimes people do over coffee. I asked the waitress if she remembered Mara. The waitress's smile tightened. That was years ago. I'm not asking for rumors, I said. I'm asking who she trusted. She poured coffee into my cup like she needed something to do with her hands. She was bright, she said. Who was she meeting? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the window. You didn't hear it from me, she murmured. But she used to talk to Mr. Bennett, the deputy, not the Sheriff Bennett, he tried. Bennett lived outside town in a single-wide that looked like it survived by refusing to move. He opened the door halfway and stared at me like I was bad news walking upright. I'm not here to cause trouble, I said. He snorted. That's what trouble always says. I told him about the tape. I didn't hand it over. I just watched his face, and his face told me I was standing on a live wire. You found it in the field, he said, not a question. Yes. He swore under his breath. Ray warned me that land would talk again someday. You knew Uncle Ray? I asked. His expression softened for one breath. He didn't confuse peace with silence. Then the softness vanished. The official story was simple because it had to be. Runaway, case closed. And the unofficial story? I asked. Bennett leaned closer, voice rough. The night she went missing, we were told to stand down, not by the sheriff, by someone who signs checks in this county. We did a search for cameras. Daylight. Edges only, no dogs, no digging. The sheriff said it would damage private property. Private property. Like land deserved protection more than a girl. Did you write any of that down? I asked. He laughed, but it wasn't humor. I did. I filed a report about the timeline. Next week I got called into the office and told I'd misremembered. Then my kids' scholarship paperwork disappeared. Then my wife's hours got cut at the bank. They didn't threaten me with a gun. They just turned the screws until I shut up. I stared at him. So you stopped. I shut up, he corrected. There's a difference. As I stood to leave, he caught my wrist. Go to Miller's Creek, he said. That's where she was last seen. That's where the search ended on purpose. Miller's Creek ran behind the north field, a thin ribbon of water that looked gentle until you heard it pulling at the bank. I parked and walked through tall grass, the sun bright, the world painfully normal. That normalness felt like another lie. At the bend in the road, a rusted guardrail leaned, and a telephone pole stood with tiny staple holes marching up its side. Someone had once stapled missing posters there. Someone had later ripped them down. The holes remained, neat little scars. I stood by the water and tried to imagine Mara as a real person, not just a name on a cassette. A girl who laughed. A girl who fought with her mother. A girl who believed meeting someone would be safe because this was a small town. I remembered her voice on the tape, steady, controlled, refusing to beg. And I understood the cruelty of it. The town didn't just lose her. It edited her out. Back in my car, my receipt list lay on the passenger seat, smudged now. Every conversation had followed the same shape. Eyes darting, voices dropping, warnings disguised as kindness. People hadn't moved on because they believed the official story. They'd moved on because the cost of not moving on was too high. And now I knew why the voice told me not to tell anyone I'd heard her. In Briar Hollow, loyalty was rewarded and truth was punished. Anyone who tried to help back then got intimidated, paid off, or shamed into silence. I started the engine, the tape heavy in my pocket, and drove toward home, toward Mom's hope, Caleb's pressure, and Marla Hensley Wright quote deadline, knowing the field wasn't the only thing that could swallow me. Marla Hensley didn't call. She appeared. That was the thing about people who were used to getting what they wanted. They didn't wait to be invited into your life. They stepped in like they belonged there, smiling the whole time, as if entitlement were the same as kindness. She arrived the next afternoon in her spotless SUV, tires barely touching the gravel, a folder on her lap, and a sympathy face that looked practiced in a mirror. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and straightened her shoulders like she was about to host someone important. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Marla the way a hungry man watches a plate being set down. I stayed quiet and let them talk first. I want to say again how sorry I am, Marla said, voice smooth. Your uncle was respected. This community is lucky to have had him. Mom's eyes softened at the word respected. In Briar Hollow, respect was the closest thing to money most people ever had. Marla slid the folder forward. My client is prepared to increase the offer, she said. Increase, Caleb repeated, excitement leaking through. Marla nodded. Signed by Friday and the number goes up. Mom's hand trembled as she opened the folder. The figure on the page was absurd for a patch of weeds. It was the kind of money that made people call it a blessing even when it felt like a warning. Caleb let out a low whistle. That's real. It's real, Marla said. And it's clean. No drawn-out negotiations, no contingencies. Funds within 10 business days of closing. 10 business days. That was how fast she thought our fear could be turned into cooperation. Mom was already seeing shingles, a furnace that didn't rattle, a bank account that didn't make her stomach hurt. Safety, predictability, peace. I couldn't blame her for wanting peace. Then I thought about Mrs. Delaney's chain still latched. I thought about Deputy Bennett's kid losing a scholarship because he asked the wrong questions. Money wasn't just security here. It was a muzzle. Marla turned to me. "Eli," she said gently, like we were old friends. "I know this is a lot, but there's a reason for the deadline. The expansion schedule is locked. If we can't finalize this parcel, we reroute and the offer reverts." "Your client," I said. "Who is it exactly?" Her smile didn't change, but something behind it narrowed. "Hensley Agricultural," she replied. "A local company, you've heard of them." Of course I had. Everyone had. The Hensleys sponsored the fireworks and the school's scholarships. Their name sat on plaques like it belonged there. "How does the Northfield help them?" I asked. "It's about access," Marla said. "A clean line for equipment and a buffer zone for adjoining parcels." A buffer zone. Like whatever happened on my land was something to be contained. Caleb leaned forward. "We can sign today." Mom shot him a look, but it wasn't disapproval. It was relief pretending to be caution. "We should read everything," she said, though her voice didn't hold much fight. Marla lifted a page. "Standard purchase agreement. I can walk you through it." I kept my hands in my lap. "Any special clauses?" "Nothing unusual," Marla said. "An easement for road access. A confidentiality paragraph, very common." "Confidentiality," I repeated. "It's just to prevent gossip about price," she said lightly. "People can get emotional." The way she said emotional made it sound like a defect poor people carried. Mom glanced at me, and for a moment I saw the mother who used to know when I was lying. "Eli," she said softly, "this could help us." Caleb didn't soften. "This will help us," he corrected, and his gaze made the word us feel like a closed door. I pictured telling them about the cassette. I pictured Caleb dismissing it as grief, or worse, calling Marla to clear it up. In Briar Hollow, betrayal was often just convenience with clean hands. "I'll sign when I'm ready," I said. A hush fell, sharp as a snapped branch. Marla's voice stayed calm. "Of course, but Friday is firm." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't get to play hero," he said low. "Not after you left." Mom flinched. "Caleb." "No," he cut in. "I'm done pretending. He shows up, gets handed the one thing that can fix our lives, and suddenly he's got questions. Where were those questions when Ray was fixing the truck alone? When Mom was staying up late, counting bills? Where were you, Eli?" I wanted to say leaving was the only way I knew to breathe. But the truth was uglier. I'd chosen my peace over their struggle, and now I was being asked to choose again. Marla closed the folder gently. "I understand emotions are high," she said. "Grief does that. I'll leave the documents here. Call me with any questions." As she stood, she touched my shoulder. The gesture looked warm. It felt like ownership. "Your uncle would want you to do what's best for your family," she said. The line hit like a knife wrapped in velvet. After she left, Mom sank into a chair and stared at the folder as if it were a life raft. "Eli," she whispered, "we can't keep living like this." Caleb paced. "He's going to ruin it," he said. "He's going to ruin everything." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said. "I'm trying to understand why they need this land so badly." Mom's voice sharpened. "Because it's worth money, Eli, that's why. Not everything is a mystery." But it was. People didn't add extra zeros unless they were buying more than dirt. That night, the tension in the house grew teeth. Caleb slammed cupboards, let silence speak for him. Mom moved around like a scared animal, careful not to start a fight. I sat on the edge of my old bed and held the cassette recorder in my palm, thumb hovering over play, listening to the quiet like it might confess. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the confidentiality clause, about how Marla had said it with such ease, about how the town had moved on from Mara with the same ease. By Thursday morning, I could feel the deadline like a hand on my throat. Mom set a mug in front of me and didn't meet my eyes. "If you're not going to sign," she said quietly, "tell me now so I can figure out what we're going to do." Caleb came in behind her. "You think you're better than us," he said, voice flat. "You think you're saving some girl you never even knew." "I know her name," I said before I could stop myself. Mom's head snapped up. "What?" Caleb narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I swallowed, hearing Bennett's warning in my head. "They turn the screws until you shut up." I forced my voice steady. "I'm saying this town didn't just lose someone. It erased her." Mom's face went pale. "Eli, please," she whispered, not as a scolding, but as a prayer. Caleb stepped closer. "Don't do this," he said. "Don't drag us into your guilt." That word, guilt, hit because it was true. But guilt wasn't the only thing driving me now. Something cleaner was there: responsibility. The kind Uncle Ray carried without applause. I left the house before I said something irreversible. I drove to the field in daylight first, standing at the gate like a man about to trespass on his own life. The land looked normal again, and normalness tried to make me doubt. I walked the fence line anyway, past the oak, past the post where the ribbon had been, but the ribbon was gone. Of course it was gone. My pulse sped up. I scanned the weeds and the road. Nothing. No marker, no sign that the night before had ever happened. The field had swallowed its evidence, or someone had cleaned up after me. On the way out, I noticed fresh tire ruts cut into the shoulder, not mine, and a cigarette butt crushed beside the gate. Somebody had been here in daylight, close enough to watch, quiet enough to leave no name. My skin tightened. Friday wasn't just a deadline anymore. It was a countdown, and I hated that. I went back that evening because daylight felt like the town's version of truth, polished, curated, safe. Real things happened after dark. The sun fell fast, and the sky turned the color of bruises. I parked, locked the car, and walked in with my flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust. The quiet returned, heavy and intimate. "I'm here," I whispered, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. For a long moment, nothing answered. My mind offered relief. Then the air shifted, like someone stepping close. Her voice came softer than before, like she was afraid of being overheard. It wasn't commanding now. It was pleading. "Please don't give it back to them." For a few hours after hearing her voice again, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That's what people do in Briar Hollow. We explain the unexplainable until it sounds polite enough to ignore. But by morning, that illusion had collapsed. Something in the air had changed. The first warning came small, the lock on my car door. It was bent, not broken, just pried enough that I could tell someone had tried to get in. No shattered glass, no missing items. Just a quiet reminder that locks are suggestions when someone really wants to see what you're hiding. Mom saw me staring at it in the driveway. "Probably kids," she said. "You know how they are." "Kids with a screwdriver?" I asked. Her eyes flicked away. "Don't start, Eli." That was the rhythm now. Me asking questions, her pretending the answers didn't exist. At the diner that afternoon, people smiled too much. Not genuine smiles. The kind that stretch too wide, like they're hiding something behind their teeth. Mrs. Larkin refilled my coffee without asking and said, "Good to have you home, Eli. Some things are better left to rest, you know." I smiled back, pretending not to understand. "Sure, like old rumors." Her eyes flickered, half warning, half pity. "Like ghosts," she said. When I got back to my car, a folded piece of paper was tucked under the wiper. No handwriting, just block letters from a printer. "Drop it. The field isn't yours to fix." The message was clean, impersonal. No fingerprints, no signature, just certainty. I burned the note in a coffee tin behind Mom's shed. Watching it curl into ash didn't make me feel safer. It made me realize someone had been close enough to touch my car twice now. That night, I met Caleb at the shop. He was working on an engine, grease smeared on his cheek. The smell of oil and metal hit me like old summers. "You've been busy," I said. He didn't look up. "So have you." I leaned against the wall. "Did you tell anyone about the sale?" "Just people who needed to know." "Like Marla." He gave me a look. She's the buyer's rep. Of course I told her. And who does she tell? He dropped his wrench hard enough to make the floor echo. What are you getting at, Eli? Someone been messing with my car. Then call the cops. I tried that once, I said. They told me missing girls just run away. He stiffened. You need to stop saying that name. I didn't say her name. You don't have to. Everyone knows what you're doing. You think you're the first one to dig into it. People tried before. It never ends well. Because they were right, I said quietly. Caleb turned, wiping his hands. No, because this town protects its own. You think truth changes that? It just paints a target on your back. I stared at him. Whose side are you on? He looked at me with something close to pain. The side that's still alive. Outside, the sun dropped behind the trees, and the first streetlight blinked on. I drove without destination, just to think. The same black sedan appeared behind me after the third turn, too slow to be casual, too steady to be random. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, its headlights stayed glued to my mirror. I turned down a side road toward the old mill, dust rising behind me. The sedan followed until the road narrowed and the trees closed in. Then it stopped, sat there idling for a moment, and when I got out, it backed away and vanished into the dark. That's when I stopped pretending. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was danger, dressed up as civility. The next morning, I found Mom on the porch with a visitor, Tommy Blake. We'd gone to school together. He'd been a year older, quarterback, polite to teachers, cruel to anyone who couldn't fight back. Now he wore a deputy's badge and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Morning, Eli, he said. Heard you've been asking questions. People talk, I said. They do, he stepped closer. Just wanted to make sure you're settling and all right. This town's changed since you left. Has it? Some things don't need digging up. His tone stayed friendly, but his gaze didn't. Your uncle understood that. I folded my arms. Funny, he also understood honesty. Tommy's smile twitched. Honesty's good. Recklessness isn't. Folks here remember what happened last time somebody couldn't leave well enough alone. Like who? He shrugged. Names fade, lessons stay. He tipped his hat at Mom and left, his patrol car humming away like a closing door. Mom turned on me, voice sharp with fear. Eli, please stop. Stop what? Drawing attention. You think you're helping, but you're stirring things that will hurt all of us. Her words landed heavy, not angry, frightened. She wasn't protecting the town. She was protecting me from it. That night, I sat outside with the cassette recorder in my lap. The moon hung low, orange and full, casting long shadows over the yard. I pressed play. Static, then her voice faint but steady. Truth doesn't die when you bury it. It just waits for someone who remembers where. The sound was soft, almost tender, like she knew I was breaking in slow motion. I whispered, Mara, what are they so afraid of? The tape hissed, then popped, and another line, one I hadn't noticed before, emerged under the noise. Don't let them build. The words sent a pulse of dread through me. Build what? I took a flashlight and headed to the field again. Every step felt like walking into the memory of someone else's fear. The fence glinted under the moonlight. The oak stood still, sentinel-like. Why me? I said aloud. Why now? The wind shifted through the grass, almost forming shapes in the movement. And then I heard it, her voice again, close but softer, not warning now, guiding. They think the past is buried, she whispered, but it's not the past they're hiding. I turned slowly. The ground near the oak looked different, an uneven patch of soil I hadn't noticed before, newer than the rest. My flashlight caught a faint outline of something metal under the dirt. Long, narrow, not the size of a box this time. My breath came fast. Mara, what's here? No answer, just the low hum of crickets and the distant rumble of an approaching truck. I killed the light and crouched, heart hammering. Headlights cut across the field, sweeping once, twice, then turned off. Whoever was there didn't drive away. The engine idled, waiting. I stayed frozen until the sound faded into distance, my muscles aching from stillness. When I finally stood, the silence was heavier than before, an almost physical weight. I looked back at the uneven ground. I couldn't dig now, not with people watching. But I understood what she meant. This wasn't about an old crime. This was about something current, something being covered even now. By the time I reached my car, the recorder clicked in my pocket. It had switched on by itself. Static crackled, then her voice again, barely a whisper, trembling like she was close to tears. "They're still using it," she said. "The field isn't dead." And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just a story buried beneath the roots. It was alive, growing under our feet, and I had already stepped too close to stop. The storm rolled in like it had been sent on purpose. By late afternoon, the sky over Briar Hollow went the color of bruised steel, and the wind kept changing its mind. Quiet one minute, shoving the trees the next. Mom paced the kitchen, muttering about the roof, about the power going out, about how we couldn't afford one more thing. Caleb locked up the shop early and came home smelling like gasoline and bad temper. "Don't go anywhere tonight," Mom told me, not looking me in the eye. Caleb didn't bother with gentle. "If you disappear in the rain, I'm not coming to get you." I nodded like I agreed. I waited until they were both in their rooms, until the TV turned into background noise again, until the first hard drops started hitting the windows. Then I took the shovel from the shed. It felt ridiculous, stealing my own family's shovel like a teenager sneaking out. But that's what fear does. It makes you move like you're guilty even when you're trying to do the right thing. I shoved the cassette recorder into my jacket pocket and pulled my hood up. The wind slapped rain into my face as soon as I stepped outside. Halfway down the driveway, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop." Just that, one word, no punctuation, like a finger pressed to my lips. I deleted it without replying, but my hands shook the entire drive to County Road 9. The field was different in a storm. The open sky didn't feel open anymore. It felt heavy, low, pressing down. Lightning flashed far off, making the oak appear and vanish in white slices. The road was empty, but that didn't mean I was alone. I'd learned that lesson already. I killed the headlights before I reached the gate and coasted in, letting the car roll to a stop. Rain hammered the roof. My heartbeat matched it. For a second I just sat there, staring at the dark, listening for an engine idling nearby, for footsteps in wet grass, for anything that said, "We see you." Nothing. That was worse. I grabbed the shovel, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped into the field. The wind bent the weeds flat as if the whole place was bowing. Water soaked through my shoes immediately. I kept my beam low, aimed at the fence line, because a bright light in a storm is basically an announcement. When I reached the oak, the recorder in my pocket clicked on by itself. Static hissed, then her voice so soft it almost got swallowed by the rain. "Not the roots," she whispered. "The stone." I froze. "What stone?" I breathed. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second the ground brightened enough for me to see it. A half-buried slab a few yards from the oak, darker than the surrounding mud, edges too straight to be natural. I'd walked past it in daylight and filed it away as just another piece of farm junk. Now it looked like a door pretending to be ground. I moved toward it, crouching. The slab was covered in wet leaves. I brushed them aside and found a rusted metal ring set into the surface. My mouth went dry. "This is here," I whispered, as if nomming it could make it vanish. Her voice came again, closer, urgent but steady. "Pull." The ring was slick, cold. I hooked my fingers through it and tugged. At first, nothing happened. Then the slab shifted with a grinding groan that felt too loud in the storm. I braced my foot, pulled harder, and the door lifted just enough for wind to rush up from below, air that smelled like dirt, iron, and time. A storm shelter. I'd heard old-timers mention them, built back when tornadoes took whole barns and people didn't trust sirens. Most got filled in, forgotten, or turned into junk storage. This one had stayed hidden in plain sight. I swung the hatch open. Darkness yawned up at me. A set of narrow concrete steps dropped into it. Slick with moisture. My flashlight beam disappeared down the throat of the shelter like it was being swallowed. Panic rose fast, the kind that says, close it, get back in the car, go home and sign the papers and let this be someone else's problem. Purpose answered it, quieter but stronger. If you don't go down, you'll never come back up the same. I put one boot on the first step. The concrete was cold enough to bite through rubber. Water trickled down the walls. My breath sounded too loud inside my hood. I lowered myself carefully, one step at a time, gripping the edge with my free hand, shovel balanced awkwardly on my shoulder. Above me, lightning lit the opening. For a heartbeat, the field looked like a painting, open sky, open land, open lies. Then the hatch shadowed over again, and I was underground with the truth. At the bottom, my flashlight landed on a thick metal door, half shut, with a simple sliding bolt. It wasn't padlocked. It was just waiting. I slid the bolt. The sound was sharp, final. I pushed the door open. The shelter smelled like old paper and damp wood. My beam swept across shelves built into the walls. Boxes lined them in careful rows, not the chaotic piles of a forgotten space, but organized like someone had been coming here on purpose. My throat tightened. This wasn't a storm shelter anymore. It was a library. On the nearest shelf sat a stack of plastic bins, each labeled in faded marker, dates, NAMES, proof. Another bin had one word that made my stomach drop. HNSLEY. I set the shovel down gently, like a weapon I didn't want to admit I needed. My hands were shaking as I opened the first bin. Inside were newspaper clippings sealed in clear sleeves. Missing girl, the headlines screamed in old ink. Under them were copies of police reports, real ones, stamped with handwritten notes in the margins. Someone had circled times, underlined contradictions, written questions in tight, angry pen. Why no dogs? Why stop at the creek? Who called the sheriff at 1:17 a.m.? The next folder held photographs, not glamorous pictures, snapshots from a disposable camera. Mara laughing in a school hallway. Mara sitting on the hood of a car, squinting into sunlight. Mara holding up a sunflower charm on a chain and rolling her eyes like she'd been teased into posing. I swallowed hard. She wasn't a rumor in these photos. She was a person. A different bin contained audio cassettes, each one dated. Not just one tape. 5, 10, more, dates stretched across months. My mind snagged on that fact like a nail. Months. The official story said she vanished, and that was it. The town had shut the book. But these tapes looked like chapters. My flashlight beam shook as it landed on the last bin, the one pushed farthest back, tucked under a folded tarp. A bright yellow sticky note clung to the lid, newer than everything else, ink dark and clear. For Eli, if Ray is gone. My chest went tight. Uncle Ray. I popped the lid. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a small stack of envelopes, each sealed, each marked with a year. 2014, 2015, 2016, and on top, an instant photo in a cracked plastic sleeve. I lifted it with 2 fingers like it might burn. The photo showed Mara, older than in the school snapshots, hair longer, face thinner but alive. She was standing in a cramped room lit by a single lamp, holding up that day's local newspaper, so the date was impossible to miss. April 3, 2016. My lungs forgot how to work. They said she ran in 2014. This photo proved she was still here, still breathing, nearly 2 years later. Behind me, the recorder clicked, and her voice slid through the static like a hand finding mine in the dark. I told you, she whispered. It wasn't the timeline that disappeared. I stared at the date until it blurred, until it felt like my whole hometown had tilted. Above me, the storm raged, open sky full of thunder. Down here, buried under mud and lies, was the truth, alive long after they told us to stop looking. And now I had to decide who would pay. I climbed out of the shelter, shaking so hard my teeth clicked. The storm had eased into cold rain, but my head still rang with that photo, Mara holding up a newspaper like proof and a plea in the same frame. The town said she ran. The town said she was gone. The town said it was over. And yet the truth had been sitting under my field like a second heartbeat, waiting for someone stubborn enough to hear it. I drove back with plastic bins buckled into the passenger seat like injured passengers. Every set of headlights behind me felt deliberate. Every passing mailbox felt like it had eyes. By the time I reached Mom's house, dawn was thinning the dark, and my hands smelled like rust and wet soil. I didn't carry the boxes inside. I couldn't. This house was full of love, yes, but it was also full of fear, and fear makes people protect you by handing you over. I hid everything in Ray's old truck behind the barn, under a tarp that still smelled faintly of oil and aftershave. Then I took one envelope into my room and shut the door. It was labeled 2016. The tape seal was clean, careful, like Ray had known time would be the only safe lock. I opened it and unfolded a letter written in his tight, slanted handwriting. Eli, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're back. I couldn't leave you nothing and pretend silence is kindness. My throat tightened, but I kept reading. Ray wrote about Mara like she was a person, not a rumor. He wrote about the first search, quick, neat, designed for paperwork, not for finding a girl. He wrote about how questions didn't get answered in Briar Hollow, they got priced. Then the letter shifted into the part he'd tried to avoid. He named names. Sheriff Dalton, Pastor Greer, Wes Hensley, Tommy Blake's uncle at the bank. And Caleb. I reread that line until the ink blurred. Caleb's my brother, the one who stayed, the one who carried the family bills like a badge, the one who looked at me like my leaving was the original sin. Ray didn't call him a monster. He called him something more believable. Caleb did it to keep the shop open. I remembered Caleb at 16, hands black with grease, teaching me how to change a tire behind the shop while Ray watched with quiet pride. Back then, Caleb's loyalty felt like armor. He stayed so the rest of us could pretend the world was stable. I'd mocked that stability as small-town weakness. Now I understood the trap. When loyalty becomes your whole identity, someone can buy it, twist it, and call it love until you don't recognize yourself. I pulled out the rest of the envelope with fingers that didn't feel like mine. Photocopies of loan papers for the shop, signed by Caleb, backed by a Hensley company. Deposits that didn't match any job. A note in Ray's pen. This is how they buy silence, one helpful check at a time. Underneath was a grainy photo taken from far away, a blue pickup near Miller's Creek. On the back, Ray had written, Caleb's truck, night of the meeting. Meeting. My mouth went dry. I slid the photo aside and found a cassette labeled April 2016, CB. My first instinct was to throw it away. If I didn't hear it, it couldn't be true. But the next instinct, the one Mara Wright quote S voice kept waking up, pushed harder. I put the tape into the recorder. Static, then a room sound. Close walls, a fan, someone shifting in a chair. A man spoke first, older, confident, the kind of voice that expects agreement. Then Caleb answered, low and tight. I'm telling you, Caleb said, this isn't what you promised. You said she'd be gone. You said it would be clean. The older man gave a soft laugh. Clean is for church, son. This is business. She's still here, Caleb hissed. People are asking. People ask until they remember who signs their paychecks. The man's voice stayed smooth. You want your shop. You want your mother's house to stay hers. Then you stop talking and you do what you agreed. A long breath. A scrape, like someone dragging a boot on concrete. I didn't hurt her, Caleb said, like he needed to hear it out loud. I didn't say you did, the man replied. But you helped. You fixed what needed fixing. You kept your mouth shut. That's what men do when they're protecting family. Protecting family. The words hit like a prayer turned into a curse. In this town, family meant you protected names, not people. It meant you saved the ones inside the circle and ignored who got crushed outside it. The tape crackled, and the older man said the sentence that made my skin go cold. We move her again after the expansion, he said. No more loose ends in your field. My field. The recorder clicked off, leaving only rain tapping the window and my heart hammering like it wanted out. I sat there staring at the blank plastic of the cassette, replaying Caleb's face from yesterday. How he brightened at the offer, how he pushed the deadline, how he warned me not to say her name. It wasn't just greed. It was fear wearing a responsible mask. I walked down the hall on legs that felt borrowed. Caleb's door was cracked. Light spilled out in a thin line. I could hear him moving inside, ordinary sounds, drawer slides, a sigh, the little noises of a man who still believed his life was stable. I stopped with my hand inches from the door. Part of me wanted to burst in, throw the tape at him, demand he look me in the eyes and explain how a shop could be worth a girl's life. Another part of me pictured what would happen next. Denial, anger, a family fight loud enough for neighbors to notice. Then Marla's polished sympathy. Tommy Blake's friendly visit. The Hensleys tightening the screws until the truth was too expensive to hold. And somewhere, Mara paying for my need to win a confrontation. I backed away and went outside. The porch boards were wet and slick. I sat on the steps and let the rain cool my face, trying to separate love from loyalty and loyalty from cowardice. Caleb was my brother. Mom was my mother. Ray was gone. Mara was still a question, breathing in the dark. In Briar Hollow, you're taught that family is everything. But what if everything is just a fence built to keep your conscience trapped? What if the only way to honor blood is to refuse to spill someone else? The choice settled in me, heavy and clear. I could expose the truth and lose my family's trust forever. Or I could stay quiet, sign the papers, and become what this town trains you to be, safe, polite, complicit. Inside, Caleb's footsteps paused, then continued. Friday was coming. And so was whatever they planned to move again, after the expansion. Friday arrived with a bright sky that felt cruel today. The town treated it like a celebration. Closing day, Marla had called it, as if buying my field was a ribbon cutting and not a burial. The signing wasn't happening in a private office. It was scheduled at town hall, right after the council meeting, with the mayor, a camera from the local paper, and cookies set out to sweeten whatever needed swallowing. Mom ironed a blouse like the cloth could hold our family together. Caleb shaved twice, jaw tight, eyes hollow. He wouldn't meet my gaze at breakfast. When he finally spoke, it was the same line he'd repeated all week, polite, desperate, practiced. Just sign, Eli, please. Money as security, silence as peace. That was the story they wanted us to live in. I drove separately. The folders from Ray's shelter sat in a backpack on my passenger seat, heavier than bricks. I'd copied the documents, sealed the originals back under the tarp, and texted Deputy Bennett from a burner number. Meet me at town hall. Bring someone you trust. That was all I dared send. In Briar Hollow, a single message could become a leash. Town hall smelled like lemon cleaner and wood. Folding chairs lined the wall. People filled them anyway, neighbors, shop owners, the high school principal, Pastor Greer with his calm smile, Sheriff Dalton with his belt polished like a promise. They greeted me like I was a returning son. Good to see you, Eli. Your uncle would be proud. Each word was warm on the surface and sharp underneath, like they were reminding me, you are being watched. Marla stood at the front beside a long table. Wes Hensley sat there too, older than I expected, hair silver, hands smooth. He looked like he'd never carried anything heavy in his life and still expected the world to call him strong. He nodded at me as if we shared a secret. Caleb took a seat beside Mom. She gripped her purse so hard her knuckles blanched. When I sat, she leaned close and whispered, "Whatever this is, don't do it like this." Like this, public, uncontained, unforgivable. The mayor banged his little gavel and talked about progress and jobs and keeping our young folks home. People clapped. Sheriff Dalton smiled. Pastor Greer bowed his head like the town itself was holy. Then the council business ended, and Marla rose with her folder. "Thank you for staying," she said brightly. "We're finalizing a land purchase that will support local growth. Eli Carter, would you come forward?" Every face turned toward me. The room felt suddenly airless. I stood anyway, because courage doesn't feel like confidence. It feels like stepping out while your legs beg you to sit. Marla slid the pen across the table. "Right here," she murmured, soft enough for only me. "Make your family proud." I looked at Mom. Her eyes were wet, pleading. I looked at Caleb. His mouth was set like he'd already decided what kind of brother I was if I didn't obey. Then I looked at Wheeze Hensley, and I saw it, the calm of a man who believes consequences are for other people. I opened my backpack. Paper rustled. The first ripple went through the crowd, confusion, curiosity. I set the photo of Mara on the table, face up, and watched that ripple become a wave. Wheeze's eyes flicked down. His smile didn't move, but something behind it tightened. "This is a personal matter," Marla said quickly. "It's a public matter," I replied, voice louder than I expected. "You're buying my field because you need it quiet." Murmurs rose, then stuttered into silence. Sheriff Dalton stood. "Eli, you need to calm down." I turned toward the room. "Mara Delaney didn't run away," I said. "She was still alive in 2016. I tapped the date on the newspaper in the photo. "That's 2 years after you told her mother to stop putting up posters." Mom made a small sound. Shock, grief, fear. Caleb's face drained of color. Pastor Greer stepped forward, hands open. "Son, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I snapped, then forced my voice steadier. "You all moved on too fast, and anyone who didn't move on got punished." Wheeze Hensley sighed, bored. "Young man," he said, "I don't know what grief has done to you, but—" I pulled out the cassette recorder. The room went still in a different way. Not polite still, predator still. Marla's eyes flashed. "You can't." I hit play. Static hissed, then a man's confident voice filled the hall. "Clean, familiar. Clean is for church, son, this is business." A second voice followed, strained and low. "Caleb." You could feel the sound land on people's ribs. Heads turned toward my brother like a flock changing direction midair. Caleb half rose, then sat, trapped between running and confessing. The tape continued. "You want your shop. You want your mother's house to stay hers. Then you stop talking and you do what you agreed." Mom stood up shaking. "Caleb," she whispered. Caleb's eyes locked on mine, and for the first time all week, he looked like a kid again, terrified, cornered, wanting someone else to save him. Sheriff Dalton lunged forward. "Turn that off." Deputy Bennett appeared in the doorway behind him, a second man at his side wearing a state badge I didn't recognize. The sight of them split the room like lightning. Bennett's voice cut through. "Sheriff, step back." Wheeze Hensley's calm finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You can't come in here and—" The state investigator held up a folder. "We have a warrant," he said evenly, "and we have corroborating evidence." The crowd erupted, questions, gasps, denials spilling everywhere at once. Power tried to regain its performance. Pastor Greer called for prayer. The mayor demanded order. Sheriff Dalton's hand hovered near his radio like a reflex. And then the side door opened. A woman stepped in, hair tucked under a hood, face pale. For a heartbeat, the room didn't recognize her. Then Mrs. Delaney's cry rose, raw, animal, impossible to fake. "Myra." The woman lifted her chin. Her eyes found mine across the chaos, and they held, grateful and furious at the same time. "I'm here," she said, voice carrying without a microphone. No static, no tape, just breath and truth. "And I'm done being erased." In that moment, the town's silence finally broke. Not into peace, but into something cleaner, consequence. And as the investigator moved toward Wheeze Hensley, I understood there was no going back, only forward, through whatever this truth would cost us next. The deal died before the ink could even dry. By the time I walked out of town hall, Marla's folder was still open on the table, the pen still lying where she'd placed it like a blessing. But the room had changed its shape. The people who used to nod at Wheeze Hensley like he owned the air were suddenly watching their own hands, as if trying to remember what they'd signed away by staying silent. Outside, sirens didn't scream. They didn't need to. The state investigator moved with the calm of someone who'd seen too many respectable men panic. Sheriff Dalton was escorted out with his jaw clenched, and Pastor Greer stopped praying long enough to look afraid. Power always performs until the audience stops clapping. Mara didn't run to her mother, not at first. She stood in the doorway with her shoulders squared, taking in the faces that had erased her. Then Mrs. Delaney crossed the distance like she'd been holding her breath for years. Their hug wasn't clean or pretty. It was shaking, messy, real, love surviving where the town's story had failed. Caleb tried to leave. He made it 3 steps before Bennett caught his arm and said his name the way you say a warning. My brother looked at me once, and in his eyes I saw 2 versions of him fighting, the boy who wanted approval and the man who'd taken checks to buy quiet. He didn't get arrested that day. He got something worse, time to think. Mom didn't speak to me for 2 nights. She moved around the house like a ghost, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping counters already clean. Grief has stages, but shame has corners. It hides where you least want to look. On the 3rd morning, she sat across from me at the table, hands wrapped around cold coffee, and finally whispered, "I didn't protect you. I protected the lie." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but that would have been another kindness that keeps the truth soft. So I said, "We all did, until we couldn't." The investigation started like thunder far off, then rolled closer every day. People who'd never spoken above a murmur suddenly found their voices, some out of courage, some out of fear of being last. The diner buzzed with rumors. The bank manager retired early. The mayor stopped using the word progress. And Marla Hensley, she vanished from town like a bad smell someone finally noticed. I kept expecting to feel triumphant, revenge that tastes sweet. Instead, I was tired. Truth doesn't hand you trophies, it hands you responsibility. Some nights I missed ignorance's simplicity and hated myself for it at all. Mara met me in the field a week later in full daylight, where nothing could pretend anymore. The sky was wide and blue, the kind of open that used to mean freedom. Now it meant exposure. She walked the fence line slowly, fingers grazing the wire as if checking it for bite marks. "I kept thinking I'd die and the town would keep eating pie," she said, voice flat. "I'm sorry," I replied, and hated how small the words sounded. She looked at the oak, then at the ground. "Ray hid what I could save," she said. "He didn't know how to bring me back without getting me killed. I didn't either." There were no perfect heroes here, just people choosing between bad options and calling it survival. Caleb came with Mom the next time. He stood at the gate, not crossing, like the land itself had authority. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it yet. He just said, "I was scared," and the sentence sounded like a child's excuse and a grown man's confession at the same time. Mara didn't scream. She didn't hit him. She did something heavier. She said, "Your fear cost me years," and let the silence sit on him without rescuing him from it. That was justice, not loud, not satisfying in the way movies promise, but honest enough to hurt. The sale never happened. The contract became evidence. The field became a line nobody could cross without remembering. After the hearings began, the county offered to buy the land for a memorial, not as a favor, but as restitution. I could have kept it and watched it rot into a private wound. Instead, I signed it over to the community with one condition. The records in the shelter would be preserved, and Mara would have a say in what was built. No warehouses, no buffer zones, no fresh paint over old rot. By the first spring, the weeds were cleared. A walking path looped around the oak. Sunflowers were planted along the fence, bright, stubborn faces turned toward the sky. A small plaque sat near the shelter hatch, not dramatic, not flattering, just true. Here the town remembered what it tried to forget. People started talking differently. Not all of them. Some still avoided eye contact, still chose comfort. But enough spoke that the silence lost its power. Kids asked who Mara was, and adults answered without lowering their voices. On quiet evenings, I'd stand at the gate and listen. The field wasn't silent anymore. It held footsteps, laughter, the scratch of wind through leaves, the low murmur of stories being told out loud. Her voice didn't just solve a mystery. It returned a town's conscience.